Welcome back to Chat Like a Native, where we help you unlock the secrets to confident English speaking. Today, we're diving deep into a collection of your sources on just that, becoming a more confident English speaker.
Sounds interesting.
In this episode, we'll be discussing how to overcome that fear of making mistakes
Right.
and turn those blunders into learning opportunities.
Yeah.
We'll also explore some powerful techniques like thinking directly in English,
Okay.
embracing the beauty of accents, and using body language to project confidence. And of course, we'll be sharing practical tips for building your vocabulary and practicing your speaking skills. Ready to chat like a native?
I think so.
Let's dive in.
I'm excited to unpack these ideas. The source material you've gathered is fascinating.
I know, right? I was particularly struck by the idea that perfect grammar doesn't necessarily equal confidence. It almost feels counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does challenge conventional wisdom. What's fascinating here is that the source highlights how hyper-focusing on grammar can actually become a stumbling block. It creates this feel of making mistakes, which can paralyze you and prevent you from speaking freely.
So it's like we're so worried about getting the grammar right that we forget the whole point of communication,
Yeah.
which is to connect with others and share our ideas.
Exactly. The source emphasizes that language is ultimately a tool for connection, not a test of grammatical perfection. And, even native speakers make grammatical errors all the time.
That's so true. I
Yeah.
never really stopped to think about it.
Right.
But it makes perfect sense. It takes the pressure off knowing that everyone makes mistakes,
Yeah,
even those who've spoken English their entire lives.
it does. And this leads us to another powerful concept from the source: embracing mistakes as learning opportunities. Instead of viewing mistakes as failures,
Right.
we can reframe them as valuable feedback, as stepping stones on our path to fluency.
I love that reframing. But how do we actually put this into practice? It's one thing to say embrace mistakes,
Yeah.
but it's another thing to actually do it, especially when we're feeling self-conscious.
You're absolutely right. It requires a conscious shift in mindset. The source offers a great example. Let's say you accidentally say, "I'm going to the park yesterday." Instead of cringing and feeling embarrassed, you can acknowledge the mistake, correct yourself, and even laugh it off.
So it's about turning those slip-ups into moments of self-correction and even humor. It takes the sting out of it.
Precisely. And in doing so, you reinforce the correct grammatical structure in your mind. The source also highlights the importance of analyzing your mistakes.
Right.
Ask yourself, what kind of mistake did I make? Why did I make it? What's the correct way to say it? This kind of active reflection turns a simple error into a powerful learning moment.
That's a great point. I think we often just brush past our mistakes without really taking the time to understand them.
Right.
But this deeper analysis could really accelerate our progress.
Absolutely. And speaking of accelerating progress, the source introduces a concept that can be a real game changer: thinking directly in English instead of translating in our heads.
This is something I've heard before, but I've always struggled with it. Why is this shift so crucial for fluency?
Think of it this way. Translating in your head is like trying to drive a car while constantly looking in the rearview mirror.
Okay.
It's slow, inefficient, and can even be dangerous. Thinking directly in English helps you shift from that clunky translation mode to a more fluid and intuitive way of speaking.
Okay, that's a fantastic analogy. I can definitely see how that mental translation process slows us down. But how do we actually train our brains to think in English? It feels almost impossible sometimes.
It does take conscious effort and practice. The source suggests starting small.
Okay.
Begin by thinking in English for simple everyday activities.
All right.
Instead of translating, "I want to drink water," try thinking, "I want water." Gradually increase the complexity as you become more comfortable.
So it's about building those neural pathways, those connections in our brain that allow us to think and speak in English more naturally.
Exactly. And over time, you'll notice that your thoughts flow more effortlessly in English. And this will translate into more fluent and confident speaking.
That makes a lot of sense. Small steps, big results, right?
Precisely. Now let's address another common concern among language learners: accents. The source is very clear on this point. Accents are not mistakes. They're simply a reflection of your unique linguistic journey.
I think a lot of people, myself included, have this idea that we need to erase our accents and sound like a generic, accentless newscaster.
Right.
But that's not realistic or even desirable, is it?
Not at all. The source beautifully describes accents as a tapestry of sounds, reflecting our personal histories and experiences with the language. Accents add richness and diversity to communication, making it more engaging and interesting.
It's like embracing the different colors and textures in a beautiful tapestry. Each thread contributes to the overall beauty of the work.
Exactly. And the source even points out that many successful English speakers, like politicians, actors, and business leaders, have noticeable accents. It hasn't hindered their ability to communicate effectively or achieve great things.
That's really encouraging to hear.
Yeah.
It takes the pressure off trying to sound like some idealized version of a native speaker.
It does. The key is to focus on clarity and effective communication.
Okay.
Let your accent be an asset, not a barrier.
That's such a powerful shift in perspective. Okay, so we've talked about mindset shifts, thinking in English, and embracing accents. But what about some practical tips for building confidence in our speaking abilities? The source mentions the importance of body language. Can you break that down for us?
Absolutely. Body language is nonverbal communication on steroids. It can amplify your message and project confidence even if you're still working on your fluency. Think about charismatic speakers you've seen. They often use gestures, make eye contact, and have an overall presence that draws you in.
It's true. You can almost feel their confidence radiating outward. The source highlights a few key elements of body language that can boost our confidence. Could you elaborate on those?
Certainly. One of the most important elements is eye contact. Maintaining eye contact with your listeners shows that you're engaged and interested in connecting with them. It conveys confidence and trustworthiness.
That makes sense. I've noticed that when I'm nervous, I tend to avoid eye contact. But when I force myself to look at people, it does make me feel more confident and in control.
Exactly. It's a small shift with big impact. Another powerful tool is using gestures. Gestures can emphasize your points, add visual interest to your speech, and even help you recall words more easily.
So it's not just about what we say, but how we use our bodies to express those ideas. Are there any specific gestures that are particularly effective?
The source recommends using open and expansive gestures rather than closed off or defensive ones. Think about using your hands to illustrate a point or to emphasize a particular word or phrase.
That's helpful advice. And I imagine posture plays a role as well.
Definitely. Standing or sitting tall with a relaxed and open posture projects confidence and authority. It literally makes you appear more confident and approachable. The source suggests practicing power poses, standing tall with your hands on your hips or your arms raised in a V shape.
Wait, seriously, just standing like that can make us feel more confident.
It might sound strange, but research has shown that power posing can actually affect our hormone levels, boosting testosterone, the confidence hormone, and lowering cortisol, the stress hormone.
Wow, that's fascinating. So we can literally fake it till we make it with our body language.
Exactly. And the more you practice using confident body language, the more natural it will become and the more genuinely confident you'll feel.
Okay, so we've covered mindset, thinking in English, accents, and body language. Now let's talk about vocabulary building. I think this is a big hurdle for a lot of English learners. The sheer number of words in the English language can be overwhelming.
It's true. The English vocabulary is vast. But the source reminds us that we don't need to memorize the entire dictionary to communicate effectively. It's about choosing our words strategically and focusing on the vocabulary that's most relevant to our needs and goals.
That's a relief to hear. But how do we know which words to focus on? There's so many to choose from.
That's where the source's advice comes in. Identify your areas of interest or the context in which you'll be using English. The source gives the example of students needing to learn vocabulary related to their academic fields, such as words like research, analyze, and present. Think about your own goals and the situations in which you'll be using English.
So for someone like me who works in media and communication, I should be focusing on words related to storytelling, podcasting, and public speaking.
Exactly. Identifying your target vocabulary makes the task of vocabulary building feel less daunting and more manageable.
Absolutely. So once we've identified those key words, how do we actually go about learning them effectively? I've tried flashcards and vocabulary lists in the past, but I find that I forget the words pretty quickly.
That's a common experience. The source emphasizes that rote memorization is not the most effective way to learn vocabulary. It's about creating connections and associations that help you remember the words and use them naturally. One of the most powerful techniques is to learn vocabulary in context.
What does learning in context look like in practice?
It means encountering new words within sentences, paragraphs, and even entire stories or articles. This helps you understand not only the meaning of the word, but also how it's used in different grammatical structures and with other words.
So instead of just memorizing a word and its definition, I'm seeing it in action, understanding how it functions within a sentence. That makes a lot more sense. What are some other strategies that can help us learn vocabulary more effectively?
The source recommends using a variety of techniques. Flashcards can still be helpful, but instead of just writing the word in its definition, try using images, creating your own sentences, or recording yourself saying the word and its definition. This multi-sensory approach can help you remember the words more easily.
Those are great tips. I especially like the idea of recording myself. It adds an auditory element that can really reinforce the learning.
It does. And don't underestimate the power of repetition. The more you encounter a word, the more likely you are to remember it. The source suggests incorporating new vocabulary into your daily life. Use it in conversations, write it in your journal, even post it on social media.
That's a great point. It's about making those words a part of our everyday language, not just something we study in isolation. The source also emphasizes the importance of active listening. How does this tie into the bigger picture of confident speaking?
Active listening is an essential skill for any language learner. It helps you understand nuances, absorb natural pronunciation and intonation, and learn how native speakers structure their sentences. It's like immersing yourself in the rhythm and flow of the language.
So it's not just about passively hearing the words, but actively engaging with them, paying attention to the way they're used and how they sound.
Exactly. The source recommends several active listening techniques. One is watching movies or TV shows with subtitles. This allows you to see the written word alongside the spoken word, helping you connect the two.
That's something I do all the time. I find it really helpful for picking up new vocabulary and understanding different accents. What are some other active listening strategies?
Another technique is shadowing, which involves repeating after native speakers. This helps you internalize the rhythm, intonation, and pronunciation of the language. It's like mimicking a musician to improve your own musical skills.
I've heard of shadowing before, but I've never actually tried it. It sounds challenging, but also really effective.
It can be challenging at first, but it gets easier with practice, and the results can be quite remarkable. You'll start to notice that your pronunciation becomes clearer, your intonation more natural, and your overall fluency improves.
That's encouraging. So we've talked about mindset, thinking in English, accents, body language, vocabulary building, and active listening. But what about those common fears and anxieties that can hold us back from speaking confidently? I know a lot of people, myself included, struggle with things like the fear of making mistakes, the fear of not having a big enough vocabulary, and even the fear of speaking too quickly or too slowly.
Those are all very valid fears, and the source addresses them directly with some reassuring advice. Let's start with the fear of making mistakes. The source reminds us that everyone makes mistakes, even native speakers. In fact, making mistakes is an essential part of the learning process.
It's like we're so afraid of making those mistakes that we end up not speaking at all. But that defeats the whole purpose.
Exactly. And, most people are much more forgiving of our mistakes than we are of ourselves. They appreciate the effort we're making to communicate in a different language, and they're usually happy to help us if we need it.
That's a good point. We tend to be our own worst critics.
We do. Now, when it comes to the fear of not having a big enough vocabulary, the source emphasizes that simple language can be incredibly powerful. You don't need to use fancy words or complex grammatical structures to express yourself clearly and effectively.
That's a relief to hear. I think sometimes we get caught up in trying to sound impressive, that we forget that communication is about connection, not showing off our vocabulary.
Absolutely. The most important thing is to be understood. And if you're not sure of a particular word, don't be afraid to paraphrase or use simpler language to get your point across.
So it's okay to admit that we don't know every word and to ask for help when we need it.
Exactly. It shows that you're humble and willing to learn. And finally, let's address the fear of speaking speed. The source makes it clear that speed doesn't equal fluency. In fact, speaking too quickly can make it difficult for others to understand you.
I know I've definitely been guilty of that in the past. I get nervous and start speaking a mile a minute, and then I end up stumbling over my words and confusing everyone.
It's a common trap. The source emphasizes that clear and understandable communication is much more important than rattling off words at lightning speed. It's better to speak at a comfortable pace where you can focus on pronunciation and clarity.
I think that's a really important point to remember. It's not about how fast we can speak, but about how effectively we can communicate our ideas.
Precisely. And as you gain more confidence and fluency, your speaking speed will naturally increase. But don't focus on speed as the primary goal. Focus on clarity, connection, and expressing yourself authentically.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from embracing mistakes to conquering common fears. But what about the bigger picture? How can we create an environment that supports our language learning journey? The source talks about the power of immersion. What exactly does that mean?
Immersion is about surrounding yourself with English as much as possible, creating a language bubble where you're constantly exposed to the language.
So it's about making English a part of our daily lives,
Yeah.
even outside of formal language classes or study sessions.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be anything drastic or overwhelming. The source suggests simple but effective strategies like changing your phone settings to English, listening to English music or podcasts, watching English movies or TV shows, and even following English-speaking influencers or YouTubers.
Those are all great ideas. I've definitely noticed that I pick up new vocabulary and expressions just from watching my favorite English language shows.
It's a fun and effortless way to learn. And don't underestimate the power of social interaction. Try joining online or offline English-speaking communities, or find a language exchange partner.
That's a great suggestion. Talking to native speakers is one of the best ways to improve our fluency and confidence. Before we wrap up this deep dive, there's one more point I want to touch on. The source talks about the importance of celebrating small wins. Why is this so crucial for language learners?
Think of it as fuel for your motivation engine. Celebrating your progress, even the smallest victories, reinforces your commitment and keeps you moving forward on your language learning journey. Did you successfully order your coffee in English this morning? That's a win. Did you understand a whole conversation on your favorite English podcast? That's amazing. Celebrate those moments no matter how small they seem.
It's like giving ourselves a pat on the back for all the hard work we're putting in. It reminds us that we're making progress, even when it feels slow or challenging.
Exactly. And those small wins build momentum, leading to bigger and bigger victories down the road. So as you continue on your journey to confident English speaking, remember to acknowledge and celebrate every step forward.
That's such great advice. It's easy to get caught up in focusing on what we haven't achieved yet, but it's so important to take the time to appreciate how far we've come.
It really is. Celebrating those milestones can make the journey feel less like a climb and more like a dance.
I love that analogy. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of confident English speaking, what's the one key takeaway you hope our listener walks away with?
If we zoom out and look at the big picture, I think the source is encouraging a shift from perfection to progress. It's not about speaking flawlessly or sounding exactly like a native speaker. It's about embracing your unique voice, expressing yourself authentically, and enjoying the process of learning and growing.
That's such an important reminder. It takes the pressure off and allows us to focus on the joy of communication and connection.
Exactly. And remember, every interaction, every conversation is an opportunity to practice, to learn, and to connect with others. So be kind to yourself, celebrate your progress, and keep those conversations flowing.
What a fantastic way to wrap up this deep dive. So tell me what resonated with you the most from today's exploration of confident English speaking. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so share your takeaways with us on social media. And remember, the journey to fluency is a marathon, not a sprint. Embrace the process, celebrate the small wins, and most importantly, have fun along the way.
It really is. Celebrating those milestones can make the journey feel less like a climb and more like a dance.
I love that analogy. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of confident English speaking, what's the one key takeaway
Right.
hope our listener walks away with?
If we zoom out and look at the big picture, I think the source is encouraging a shift from perfection to progress. It's not about speaking flawlessly or sounding exactly like a native speaker. It's about embracing your unique voice, expressing yourself authentically, and enjoying the process of learning and growing.
That's such an important reminder. It takes the pressure off and allows us to focus on the joy of communication and connection.
Exactly. And remember, every interaction, every conversation is an opportunity to practice, to learn, and to connect with others. So be kind to yourself, celebrate your progress, and keep those conversations flowing.
What a fantastic way to wrap up this deep dive. So tell me, what resonated with you the most from today's exploration of confident English speaking? We'd love to hear your thoughts, so share your takeaways with us on social media. And remember, the journey to fluency is a marathon, not a sprint. Embrace the process, celebrate the small wins, and most importantly, have fun along the way.